Hi everyone, welcome to Musical Mornings with Rock Island Sound from the Westchester Children's Museum. My name's Andrew and I play the violin, and you can join me every Monday through the rest of July to learn all about the violin. And today we're going to be learning about Mozart. So Mozart was a composer in the classical era. So before we've talked about Bach and Vivaldi, and they were a little bit before. Now, Mozart was born after Bach and Vivaldi both had passed away. So Mozart came after. So we're going to learn a little bit about him. We're going to learn about some of his works for violin and some of how he composed and some of the style of how they composed and how they organized their music. So, and again, if you would like to tell me how old you are in the comments, that would be great. So first off, I'm going to start off by playing an excerpt from a piece that probably some of you have heard. You might not know the name of it, but I'm sure you've heard it before. So I'm going to see if you can guess what the name of the piece is. It's by Mozart. All right. So could anybody tell me, first of all, have you heard this piece before? And if you have, do you know the name of it? I see somebody, 5 years old. Very good. I'm sure you're going into kindergarten next year, if you've already done kindergarten. That's really cool. All right. So while we're waiting for any responses, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So that's his full name, and Amadeus means beloved. That was his middle name. So here's a picture of Mozart. So he was born in the year 1756, and he only lived until 1791. So he was only 35 years old when he passed away. But in that time, he was able to compose over 600 compositions for all different combinations of instruments and voices. He composed symphonies, 41 symphonies. He composed piano pieces, both for solo piano and for piano and orchestra. He composed violin concertos. He composed string quartets. And when we talked about that the very first week, we talked about how 4 string players can get together and make a quartet, so 4. And he also composed lots of operas, so with singers on the stage and an orchestra in the pit, and to tell a story by singing. So, and one of the reasons he was able to compose so much, he just had music going in his mind all the time, and he started at an early age. So we have someone who was 5. That's when Mozart started performing in public when he was 5 years old. So imagine going across Europe. He would tour with his father and his older sister, and they would go from they lived in Salzburg in Austria in the middle of Europe, and they would go to Vienna. They went to Paris. They went to London. So they went all across Europe to perform, and Mozart would also compose. And one of his first pieces was around when he was 5 years old. And he played piano, was his main instrument, but he also played the violin and the viola as well. And so he composed many different things. So one of the symphonies that he composed was his 40th symphony, and there's a couple of excerpts we can hear from that. I think you've probably maybe heard this before. was from Mozart's 40th Symphony, the first movement. Okay, so the piece I played before, the one that sounded like this, so that was called Eine kleine Nachtmusik. And in German, that means a little bit of night music. And it's a serenade. So composers would write music for festive occasions that the nobility, the princes and dukes and kings would have get-togethers outside, big get-togethers, you know. And so Mozart and other composers would write for these gatherings. So the serenade, Eine kleine Nachtmusik, was written for something like that, and it was written for string orchestra. So that was what the first violins play. And a little night music, it's just, no one really knows why it's called a little night music, but it's very, very nice piece. All right. So now, another excerpt. Now, a lot of times in Mozart's works, people have put some silly words to it, so to kind of remember how the melody goes. So I'm going to play some of the fourth movement of Symphony Number 40, and then I'm going to tell you what the words are that some people use to help remember, and see if you can see that when we play it again. So, the first part, you have this thing going up. And the words that people use are, oh, Mozart's in the closet. Oh, Mozart's in the closet. And then, because it's also it should be really soft. And then, the next part is loud. So in music we say piano for soft and forte for loud. So when we get to the loud part, we say, let him out, let him out, let him out, let him out. So it goes like this. Oh, Mozart's in the closet, let him out, let him out, let him out. Oh, Mozart's in the closet, let him out, let him out. Yeah. So that is one way, so people come up with words for that. Another one is from a piece called a piano quartet. And it's not for a quartet of pianos, as the name might sound. So you don't have 4 pianos on stage. But it's for an ensemble of 4 instruments: piano, violin, viola, and cello. And the first movement goes like this. And so somebody decided to say, you know what would help me remember this? Answer the telephone. So it seems a lot of people have put words to Mozart's music. So when there aren't any words at all, but it's a good way to remember some of these. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk. I'm going to play some excerpts from Mozart's 3rd Violin Concerto, and we're going to talk about how composers in Mozart's era organized their music, how they laid it out. And so in a concerto in this era, we talked about concertos with Bach and Vivaldi. And sometimes they had 3 movements, sometimes they had 4 movements, sometimes they had 5 movements. So in Mozart's era, there was kind of a consensus or agreement kind of how music should be organized. And so in a concerto, you have the orchestra, and they play first. They take the themes, and they present them first. And then the soloist comes in. And the soloist will play a theme, the main melody of the piece. So in Mozart's 3rd Violin Concerto, the melody is this. So that's the main theme, the main subject. And you probably might have heard that it's when pieces are named, it's Violin Concerto Number 3 in G major or in A minor or something like that. So what is G major? G major is the key. So in music we have 12 chromatic notes in our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then back to the G. So we have G, A flat. So G major is a major scale. You have 8 notes in it. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. And so those notes are in the piece, and there might be some extra notes that have to do with the harmony. So the piece, if it says it's in G major, the first melody is always going to be in the key of G. And that kind of lays off. And then we end in G major. So the composer will present the subject, and they might present another subject here in a concerto. Now hear how the harmony gets a little bit? Like it's like, you can't wait to do something. Now here, think about, if we're in G, and then we have to move up, like you're on a step and you're going up 5 more steps. G, A, B, C, D. Now we're arrived at D, which is, they call that the dominant key. So the G major, we call it the tonic. And then the D major, we call it the dominant in G. And so the second main subject is usually presented in that dominant key. In D major. And so on, and so then that will get developed a little bit more. And then there's another subject that comes in a little bit slower. So first movements usually go with that. You have your subject, then you have a little bit of transition, then you have your second subject, and then a little bit of transition. And then what happens is there's a development section. So we take some of these melodies and harmonies, and then we really go away from G major. We can go far away. So listen to how Mozart starts off the development. So he goes off into and then it starts again. And then it starts breaking up into even smaller pieces after that. And then eventually it returns to the subject. Okay. And then right before the orchestra does their little ending part, there might be a spot where the orchestra starts holding a big chord, and then there's something called a cadenza. And a cadenza is where it gives the soloist the opportunity to improvise or make the music different based on the theme. So if our theme is like this, you might start improvising. And then it would go off, and some of these cadenzas can be very virtuosic. So that's the first movement. The second movement would be a slower movement, and again, it would kind of be organized the same way. You have your first subject, And then in this instance, Mozart really doesn't go into have much of a second subject. He kind of repeats the same thing in the dominant key. And then he expands upon it. And then in the third movement, he does something called a rondo. So a rondo is where you have one subject, and then let's call that A. Then you have a second subject, let's call that B. And then it goes back to A, and then it might have another subject, let's call that C. And it goes back to A, and then it might go back to B, and then it might go back to A. So we always have one that's always going to be heard, and then there's some ones in between. So with Mozart's third movement of the concerto, it sounds like this. So that's the first subject, and then the second subject comes off the... like that. Then what he does is he does a variation on that for the C section. And then what Mozart does is he actually changes and does another section, a D section. And then he does another section. And then it goes on with the triplets. And then after all this different stuff, he comes back. All right. Okay. So I hope that you've learned a little bit about Mozart and how the music is organized a little bit, and some of his compositions, and he has a lot to offer. So I encourage you, if you're interested in more, to definitely seek more pieces out on YouTube of different symphonies or violin concerti or any of the operas that he has written. That really be everything Mozart wrote. He was one of the other things before we go is that a lot of composers would leave sketches of what they wrote, and then there would be like 7, 8, 9, 10 different sketches of ideas. Mozart would sketch in his head, and then when he thought it was ready to go, he would write it down. And there's some sketches, some sketchbooks of his, but most of the time he just had it up here in his head, and then wrote it down when he was ready. All right, everybody. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. You can join me next week. And next week we're going to learn about Beethoven and the violin. So you can join me 9:30 a.m. next Monday. And then tune in tomorrow at 9:30, and Rachel is going to talk more about singing. And one of the other things is that I do offer violin and viola lessons through Rock Island Sound, and also a fiddle camp. For anyone that is interested, you can go online to Rock Island Sound, or you can call 914-967-0800. That's 914-967-0800. All right, everyone. I will see you next Monday. Have a great day. Enjoy the nice weather. Bye-bye.